Hello everyone, this is Korosh Erfani and today is Friday, March 13th, 2026. Let's start with the breaking news. We know that the United States today was bombing one of the most important islands in the south of Iran, the famous island that is called Khark. And this is the most important island from which Iranians are exporting something like 90% of their oil. So the military installation on this in this land was bombed, completely obliterated, as you can see. That's the famous word favorite of Donald Trump. Has been obliterated, and of course they didn't touch the oil installations and facilities over there. So the Iranians are reacting to what happens over there and says that if there is any damage to the oil installation, of course we are going to attack any oil industry or installations that are belonging to the American companies, right? So that's why they are announcing already that if something happens over there, we are bombing all the installation with regard to oil belonging to the American companies. Here you can see spokesperson in Iran says Iran's military will destroy US-linked oil infrastructures if its own facilities are attacked. So my hypothesis is that the Americans get rid of the military part of what's happening in Khark. Now that's a really good moment for Israel, an excellent opportunity, we can say, to spread the war in such a way that all the countries, all the Arab countries in the region can be against of Iran and even start to act against Iran. Because once they are in the face of the reality of losing the most valuable things that they have, which is the oil infrastructures, of course they don't have anything to lose, and this is what Israel is planning. So most probably some people are warning about that in the coming hours we should be waiting for a surprise by Israelis, even though the Americans don't want that, right? And we know that in some cases, for example, when Israelis bombed the oil installation and reserves in the south of Tehran, the American says that we didn't do that, and we don't want to do that. Why? Because when you start to attacking the oil industry, oil infrastructures, it means that Iran is authorized legitimately to answer, to fire back, and do the same thing. And of course, from that moment, we are going to have serious trouble. Israel is going to do that. If I am not wrong, it's going to happen very soon. And from that moment, I think we enter after today, which is the 14th day of the war of Israel and the United States on Iran, we enter the real step of this war, which means that these 2 weeks, with all the aggressivity that we can see there, will be just an introductory step, and the real war starts from the moment Iran, after having been bombed, of course, its own installation, and essentially in this island, the island of Khark, will start to obliterate, but this time really obliterate all the oil facilities of the Arab countries. We are talking about the oil facilities of the Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and even Oman. So this is something horrible, terrible, that can bring about a huge increase in the price of oil in such a way that some sources are talking about the possibility of this. Look at that. So the Economist reports that if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed just until the end of the month, some analysts reckon crude could surge to 150 to even 200 a barrel. And I am predicting that if such a thing happens, for sure we won't have to wait until the end of the month, and immediately after such an event, which means bombing the oil installation of the Iranian island of Khark, and then the fireback of the Iranian to destroy the oil facilities of the Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, we are going something like this immediately. After a few hours, I can tell you, 150 or even 200 a barrel. Because before all of this, already a few hours ago, we got to $104, even though right now, if we go through the CNN business page, you can see that right now it's something, the Brent crude is around $90, 90.24. But as you can see, we have been till more than $104 according to some sources, which is significant because we didn't have yet this situation we are talking about. But as you can see, the people are reporting that we got already $104 for oil in the 15th, which means at the beginning of the 15th day of the war. So if there is such a possibility or such a preparedness in the oil market, I think if the event we are talking about happens, right, we can be sure that it will give rise to a huge surge of the oil price, something like $150 to $200. So we should know that if this occurs, we are going to have the gas price in the United States, according to estimation, between $7 to $9 per gallon, which means almost twice of what it is in some cases, and from that moment, of course, we must be ready for something horrible in the United States and its economy. I think the United States is somehow aware about that. That's why Trump is talking about the possibility of getting more and more oil from the California coast. Here you can see Trump administration invokes emergency powers to restart oil operations of California coast. We know that these operations had been shut down because of the environmental issues, but now under the excuse of emergency situation, they are trying to, create effectively this catastrophic environmental situation here in California in order to get more oil. Why? Because they know that something bad can happen over there, right? They know that Israel can make a horrible situation, come about over there in the Persian Gulf. So that's why they want to rely more and more on the internal sources. But we should know that it's really it's not easy to do so, and it takes time. It's not the good quality of petrol, and it's not an immediate answer to what is going on. So all of this must be taken into consideration. But don't forget that the United States doesn't want this situation. I am talking about the possibility of bombing the oil infrastructure, the Iranian oil infrastructure in the island of Khark, which was bombed today for its military assets, and from tomorrow, from in a few hours on, we can have effectively this nastiness of Israel in order to blow up everything. In already it's a war, but more or less contained in the region. And imagine that with this destruction, Israel will spread it out everywhere. And this is what will create, I think, a regional war, and that's the objective of Israel. And the objective is to put effectively all the Arab countries against Iran in action in such a way that the attack and Israel can get away, and can get hit less and less by the Iranians, because Iran will be busy, in the face of an attack by all the Arab countries, for example. And this is very, very vicious country, Israel, and it has only and only the nasty plans like this. Now, the things are getting more and more complicated. We should be aware about that. In a few hours, we will be in the 15th day of this war, in the third week, and it looks like that it doesn't have anything to do with what was recommended by the military to Trump administration, to Pete Hegseth as the Defense or War Department Secretary. The military advisors were talking about the possibility of having a reaction of Iran that cannot be controlled, right? This is what they are saying us, and it looks like that. Look at this article from Financial Times talking about how Iran's fight back surprised the U.S. Surprised because the decision of the United States has been based on a lot of lies, misinformation, disinformation, manipulation, and misinterpretation provided by Israelis, mainly by Israelis, even though we cannot deny the role of the Americans in this catastrophe. But Israelis wanted really bring the United States into this war at any cost, in any way. And that's why they didn't hesitate to provide a lot of lies so that they can be completely misguided, misled, and finally accept to participate in this war. Don't forget that the Americans had the impression that they are going toward something that should last between a few hours to a few days. The reason for which Trump was using the term of incursion, right? That's a short incursion, because it has been said to Trump that we are doing that. We are going to do just a short incursion, an operation for a few hours, 1 or 2 days, and that's all. Like what we have had in Venezuela, for example. And they thought really that it's possible to do it with Iran. Why? Because they didn't have any information about Iran, because they have been kicked off from Iran in 1979, and from that moment, the Americans didn't have any direct source of information and intelligence in Iran. Everything was by a second hand, and mainly by who? By Israel. Israel, of course, was very well informed about what's going on in Iran, had information and intelligence. But they didn't really provide to the Americans what was the authentic data, the authentic information, the first-hand information. They manipulated it, they shrunk the problematic portion, they exaggerated where it could really encourage the American to do so, and from that moment, in the absence of any possibility for the American to check that, to recheck that, to verify that, of course they accepted, because they considered Israeli as their allies. And normally an ally doesn't really lie to you, right? It can provide you with the information that is authentic, real, and based on the reality on the ground. But Israeli are totally deceptive in this case, and we know the consequences. That's the consequences. Because now we are talking about the United States that will have many, many troubles, even in the aftermath of this war. Which means that the period of the post-war period will be even more problematic for the United States than the period of war itself. Why? Because the Americans lost completely any credibility in the international scene. Now, many Asian countries are reviewing really their strategy of defense, national security, because they are seeing that the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf are in a very bad situation because of the impotence, lack of capability of the Americans to defend them, right? So that would be the same thing. And essentially, for example, for the South Korea, we saw that Americans requested a lot of defense installation over there to bring them to the Middle East because they were lacking for the war with Iran. And the South Korea president says that I can do anything. I can do nothing in order to change the Americans' mind, and that's why it means that now we are somehow, at least partially, defenseless against the North Korea. But what we can do, that's the American. Now they are in the quagmire, and they are, trying to do something in order to save a minimal of credibility, military credibility for themselves. Because they didn't have, this article is very interesting since it goes over the military experts, analysts. Okay, they are telling in this article that nobody was waiting from the Iranian such a degree of resistance. Just one phrase could be very interesting, because at a given moment one of them says that you cannot find a country better than Iran here. It's very interesting and emblematic. No one has done more with less than the Iranians. Done more with less. Why? Because Iran hit American embassies in the region, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, something unimaginable for the Americans. The American embassies were one of the biggest one in the Riyadh, for example. All the U.S. bases across the region had been hit. Another unbelievable thing, as I told you, 50 years of efforts of installation, creating the infrastructure facilities with more than $1 trillion budget gone, blow off completely. And we saw the capability of Iran to put an end to any activity in the local regional airports, with the huge consequences for the global activity, global economic activity, and for, of course, the countries like UAE, with the busiest airport of the in the world in Dubai, completely shut down, right? We saw that Iran attacked the data centers, something that no big companies was really thinking about, that would be possible to have their data centers blown up by Iranians. We saw that Iranians are able to chase the Americans. Where? In their bases? No, in the hotels. Every move, and in this article several times says that it's unbelievable how Iranians were able, look at this, Iran has precise intelligence when it comes to not only where we are based, but a lot of our patterns of life and how we work as military. So that's why they were able to find the hotels in which these militaries are migrating from their bases and hit them, hit exactly the floor or the rooms where they are. Iranian dismantle completely desalination plant for some of the countries, and you remember we said that they can completely take off all the power from these countries, and in this case there would be a crisis of drinking water shortage. They hit the ports, in the region, the harbors and ports. They could destroy a lot of oil and gas facilities, and they are ready to make much more damages over there if it happens that Israel or the United States wants to attack the oil industry of the Iranian side, and even the residential buildings. Right? All of these from a country that was not supposed to be able to do none of this. Of course you are surprised. Of course you are shocked. And of course you don't know what to do, because you started a war, off the cliff, without preparation, because of the Israeli pressure. You cut a lot of corners, right? And now you are in a very bad position where you cannot really know when, where, and how exactly you can put an end to this war, even though you want that. The United States really does want that, the end for this war, but it's impossible. We must be able to make this distinction between the United States and Israel. The United States wants always start to start the war that are somehow controlled, managed, short, clean cut. Even though they cannot do that, because in Afghanistan it took 20 years, in Iraq more than 10 years, in Vietnam several years, so they cannot really do that, but they want this. The Americans want really have the short war with a very high accomplishment of their missions and getting, their objectives done. It's impossible. But for this case, really, Trump thought that it would be very fast, because it had been told. Don't forget that. He had been told that, and that would be the case. Very short, precise, and determining, clean cut, and we will be out. He believed in that. Trump didn't want to be dragged into a huge one, a long-lasting war. But Israel wanted exactly, the opposite, the contrary. Israel wants a long-term war. Israel actually doesn't want to end any of the wars it initiated. That's why it continues to kill the people on Gaza. That's why it's taking control of more and more territory in the West Bank. That's why it is bombing right now Lebanon. And for Iran, Israel wants really an endless war. That's for sure. Why? Because Israel cannot exist without war. Israel cannot last without war. There are many people who are talking about the future of Israel as something that is not ensured. They are talking about the possibility of, having Israel as a country that will disappear in a few years, in some years. Why? Because once you wage war after war, you accumulate all the problems, and then at a given moment you cannot really handle that. Right now we have the documents that shows the documents that are showing us the possibility of Iran to keep a pressure by missiles, drones over Israel is completely disintegrating the fabric of society in Israel, which means that the people now are extremely angry against each other because there is a mood of survival over there. The people want to survive at any price, and as they don't have any attachment to ethics, to morals, or something like that, they are sacrificing each other. For example, for the shelter, when some people can get there in order to have, a kind of control of the number of people over there, they close the door, they lock the door, and they keep their compatriots, out, away. Which means that they prefer just to save their lives and to have a relative comfort, at the expense of the life for other people, to the detriment of their other citizens that are out or away under, for example, the missiles or bombs or whatsoever. This is it. Because we are already 2 days, don't forget that, beyond the 12 days of the previous war. In the previous one, you remember, after 12 days, Israel asked the United States to do something in order to have a ceasefire. But this time, it looks like that There is no such a calculations anymore for Israel, because Israel is on the brink of, as I told you, a kind of implosion, social implosion, political one, economic one. Right now, the people, even as a gossip, are talking about the fate of Netanyahu, fate of Ben Gvir, because nobody has seen them for days. So a total chaos, where only and only the army is trying to show that it's in control of the situation by the air defense system or by attacking Lebanon. We knew that the foolish behavior of Israel will cause serious damages to the Israeli society and to Israeli future. Everybody knows that, right? And what is interesting, that they are really insisting to do worse, to worsen the situation. Look at this news. So the people are talking about the fact that Israel is preparing to launch a full-scale ground invasion of Lebanon. So the objective is and seizing completely an entire area in the south of Litani River, and starting to dismantling of Hezbollah military infrastructure and getting there installed, which means occupying permanently a part of Lebanon with the support of U.S. Army, right? United States is okay with that, and ask only to avoid bombing the things like the Beirut International Airport or the infrastructures that are managed by the Lebanese government. Otherwise, you can kill anyone you want if it belongs to Hezbollah, or if you think that it belongs to Hezbollah. Like the genocide in Gaza is the same story, is the same logic, is the same model. What's interesting is, in this case, is that Hezbollah is a paramilitary force being ready for years and years, only and only for the ground battle, right? That's the particularity of this force. They don't have logistic, they don't have that much, missiles, drones, artillery, but they are very good in the face-to-face and direct fight. And that's why they are waiting really for the Israelis. And already we can see that Israelis are trying to gather the forces in the northern Israel in order to start this invasion. And Hezbollah and Iran as well are targeting them, because any gathering means that many soldiers, hundreds and hundreds of soldiers in one place, because otherwise you cannot organize, or getting the tanks and the armored vehicles over there. Of course, once you do that, before attacking, you are the best target possible. That's why Hezbollah is getting a huge amount of casualties from there, in the previous days, this week. And even Iran is aware of that and are targeting that region so that they can have more and more damages and casualties to the to the Israeli army that is getting to have a full-scale ground invasion of the southern Lebanon. So once they are there, because they have already this experience in 2006, we remember that they went into Lebanon in order to go to Beirut directly. That was the objective that Ehud Olmert the Israeli Prime Minister at that time had said. But we know this famous war of 30 days or 33 days was a real catastrophe for the Israeli army. This time they are trying to use the American support, American Air Force, in order to completely erase that region before they go there. But I am not sure that they can get ahead. Not very sure. Because in order to make progress, you have finally to go there, and once you are there, Hezbollah is waiting for them somehow to some point. At a point, I am pretty sure that Hezbollah is welcoming such a thing. So just imagine that if, for the case of the war with Iran, they cannot really count on getting none of the objectives that Israel and the United States had fixed, had set as the goal. Because look at this article from Haaretz, that's analysis. It said that with Iran undefeated and the protester cowed, Israel forced to lower expectations. So which means that we must forget about the regime change, or getting control of the Iranian territory, things like that. Completely, very far from what has been planned before. So, what's going on? Israel now is experiencing something that was not in its calculation, which is the Iranian resistance. Right? And we know that in the face of such a resistance, they don't have anything to do except increasing more and more bombing the residential areas because they were supposed to destroy and obliterate any military capabilities of Iran in the first or second days. Okay, not first and second day. Let's talk about first and second week. Okay, we are over. Now it's over. And while it must be done completely, we can see that here the people are talking about more and more attack by Iran. This is one of them. So IRGC is announcing tonight will be the strongest attack on Israel since the beginning of this war, which means that there is no de-escalation, there is no reduction of our force, and our force has not been weakened, but on the contrary, now after 2 weeks we are able to attack in terms of the strongest strike that we can have over there. The people are talking here, it's a very interesting point. It says that I don't understand why Iranians are announcing before the attack that they are going to attack. Why? Usually from a military strategy point of view, it's not very wise to do so. He said that I thought about that, and suddenly I realized that Iran announces an attack in advance to absolutely humiliate Israel, because announcing an attack in advance shows how helpless Israel is. And we can see that it is the case now. Even though we know that Iran is sending less missiles or drones toward Israel, but we know that they are hitting They are hitting the different parts of Israel. And it looks like that in some cases they are targeting really specific location belonging to Israeli military, Israeli intelligence, Israeli military research and development. So what's going on? That's the reason why I think Israel and the United States are thinking about how they can put an end to this. This situation, I am pretty sure, will make for a new configuration, okay? Where at the end of the day, the Americans and Israel won't have just two options, two very radical options. This is unbelievable, but in accordance with the reality that we can observe, the facts, we can see that there is not really any other option. There is no a third option, according to what I am watching and going over and observing. The first option is to accept the Iranian victory, to accept to be defeated. Israel and the United States must accept to be defeated in this first option. So what does it mean for the region, for the future of Israel, for the future of the United States? Really, really bad. For the Iran, everything will be to the good, But for Israel and for the United States, in the aftermath of such a humiliated defeat, that would be a catastrophe for their economy, for their society, for the position of Netanyahu over there, Trump in the United States. Why? Because accepting such a victory for Iran will make Iran, as I told in my previous videos, the superpower of the region. We are talking about the Persian Gulf region and of course the whole Middle East. Because Iran will be able to say that I could defeat two most powerful armies in the world combined. So from that moment on, nobody can really threaten Iran, because everybody will realize that this is a country that we cannot touch. It's something like North Korea. Why nobody is joking with North Korea? Because they know that's a very aggressive country and with huge capability of nuclear weapons, and beyond that even with the hydrologic bomb and a variety of chemicals and so on. So nobody wants really to tease them, right? To provoke them. So that would be the case of Iran. Once Iran shows that it was able to put down two biggest armies in the world, of course it will be respected. And that's why it will be in a position of superpower. Israel will be seriously overshadowed by the Iranian power. The Arab countries will realize that from that moment they have to comply with what Iran will dictate to them, right? As the strategy, as the national security strategy, and the alliances, with which country, and so on and so on. Iran really will dictate what must be going on in the region. The consequences for Israel is catastrophic. Israel will be doomed to be limited in that region, abandoning somehow the idea of greater Israel and become an ordinary country over there. And I told you, because it is completely contrasted with the nature of Israel, which is a belligerent nature, right, a warmongering nature, Israel will die out. Not immediately, but in long term, without war, Israel is over. For the United States, it will be catastrophic because it will be the most decredibilized superpower that we have had in the history. Most unreliable superpower, right? With trillions dollars of loss, because just in 2 days, yesterday and today, we got the number $2 trillion of loss for the financial market in the United States. $2 trillion for 2 days just. So trillions of dollars loss materially. Its legitimacy and credibility will be called into question. Many countries start to review their, agreements or contracts with the United States. Inside the United States, the GOP and Trump will be for sure losing the midterm elections, and then consequently it would be matter of impeachment and other situations. So we are talking about the possibility for a new form of stability in the region, a new configuration where everything will be different from just 2 weeks ago. Is it possible? Such a thing is not impossible, but it's hardly conceivable as plausible, we can say, right? Theoretically it's possible, but practically I think we are far from that. And especially because of Israel, not only for the humiliation that the United States must go through, but essentially for Israel. That's why I think Israel will select the second option. I said that there is only now, at the end of the day, 2 options will remain. One is this one, accepting Iran as the victor of this war and being humiliated, completely erased from the region, Israel, United States, for long term even, and having Iran as a superpower, which is a complete nightmare. And the second option is, go for nuclear. All right? And nuclear means nuke Iran. And I think, if I am not wrong, they started really to prepare everything for this second option. This title is very paradoxical, because on the one hand is talking about the necessity of having the lower expectations by Israel, right? Because it's forced to do so. But this is what can force Israel to accept the first option, the victory of Iran, And at the same time, it's talking about the fact that if you don't want to do so, if you don't want to be, to have this historic humiliation for Zionism and for the Zionist entity, what you have to do is the second option. And the second option is a radical one. But what is very worrisome is that the Zionists are preparing the grounds for this second option. Look at one of the media belonging to the Zionist, The Economist, with this title: So Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is thought to be more eager than his late father and predecessor to get a bomb. Hello? So we are back to the square zero. The huge capacity and risk and danger of Iran to finally get the bomb. And as we killed his father, who had a fatwa in order to prohibit the production, the fabrication of the atomic bomb, right? This guy, which is now to be in a very bad mood. Why? Because look, after the killing of his family, he may not be in the mood to negotiate, but on the contrary, it can be in the mood to get the bomb. So what does it mean? They started, the necessary story in order to create the conditions for who? For the United States. Saying that not only you didn't obliterate the the Iranian nuclear facility, but now with the elimination of the father, the son is in a very bad mood, angry, and most probably much more radical than his father. And of course, he is, this is not information, no? This is interpretation, this is manipulation in order to prepare everything for that option we are talking about. Is thought to be more eager than his father, late father and predecessor to get a bomb, because we in the Economist, we have a very specific power to know in which mood the people are and what is really the consequences. So that's why we are saying there are no good options for Iran's nuclear program. They are talking about bombing more than 5,000 targets in Iran during 2 weeks. Two most powerful armies in the world, and now they start effectively to talk about that the result is zero. The result is not good at all, finally, because the guy is very nervous, in a very bad mood. He lost everyone, his father, his wife, his children, and so on. So that's why we think in The Economist, we are very specialists, right, for that. That's why we think that that guy is really, really eager to get the bomb, right? This is how it works. You remember in 2003, Colin Powell in the Security Council of the United Nations with the famous jar with we don't know what exactly within, talking about the uranium of Iraqi government, Saddam Hussein getting purple or something. It's exactly the same circus. It's the same criminals. It's the same mafious people. So after having bombed, after having several times they have been talking about obliterated, completely obliterated, and now we can see that no, what has been obliterated is all the other options than nuke Iran, right? This is the only thing that I see obliterated. Any other options? Normal war, peace, agreement, ceasefire, or anything, and we have just one and only one option, which is that's it. They want to get the nuclear bomb, We are sure that Mujtaba is much more radical and in a very bad mood. In this mood, he doesn't want to negotiate. He doesn't want any ceasefire or anything else. So the only thing that we see possible would be the nuclear bomb. Why? Because they have 400 kilograms of uranium that is enriched at the rate of 60%. The AIEA announced, the International Atomic Agency announced that we know at least 200 kilograms of this famous enriched uranium should be somewhere in Isfahan, right? Because they want really to bomb all the facilities over there. We are talking about the research and the industrial reactor of the nuclear facility in Iran, and they are finding, an excuse with this agency, which is one of the institutions that belong to the Zionism, in order to do this final blow. I am pretty sure that Israel and the United States, and essentially Israel, and of course its slave, the United States, cannot accept the first option. The first option is so far from what the Zionist wants for Iran, for the Middle East, for the whole region, for the whole world, that it is unimaginable. They cannot imagine such a thing, that Iran is announced as the victorious, as the one that won the war, right? And from that moment, of course, the United States must be considered as loser. Can you imagine that Trump comes and says that we lost the war, and now we have to accept the normal rights of Iran? These are the three requests of Iran for any ceasefire: that our legitimate rights must be recognized, like enriching the uranium at 3%, so having nuclear activities, of course, that they must pay for all the damages, recompensation, and they must guarantee no more aggression, no more military attack, on Iran. So how we can imagine that a monster like Benjamin Netanyahu, or a completely foolish individual, brainless like Trump, accepts such a thing? I don't see even 1% chance for this scenario, even though is the most logical result of such a chaotic, stupid process, right? For many people, that's the only option. They don't see anything else, right? And that's why they are recommending effectively to do so. But I think because they are surprised, right? This is the title of the article we were talking about. Because they saw that Iran have fired more than 3,000 missiles and drones at the US allies in the Gulf, and of course hundreds on Israel, because they saw that Iran is able to strike tankers, merchant vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is completely shut down, because they see that they are able to close completely the Dubai's airport, for example, or the refinery in Abu Dhabi, in the Kuwait's airport, and capability to destroy completely any grid power in the region, or the oil infrastructures. For all these surprises, of course, now they are in a very tight corner, and they have to make a decision, right? The decision is either accepting the defeat, a complete failure humiliating failure, or to go nuclear. So to me personally, the chance for accepting the first one is really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, less than 5%, really, objectively, with the knowledge that we have, from Israel, from Zionists, from Trump, from this absolute idiot team in the White House, under total control of the Zionists, right? When we see this idea of the Zionists to go toward the Armageddon, believing that that's the end of time and we have to accept the final war and we have to do whatever it must be done, I see much more, something like more than 90% chance for this second destructive option, which is to nuke Iran, and from that moment to trigger a nuclear world war, a complete nuclear atomic international conflict where every country that has this power, nuclear power, will be somehow involved in one side or another, and then we get to the end of our presence as the human species on Earth. Again, as you can see, when I start my discussion, my argument in any program, I don't have any pre-idea, a pre-established idea or preconceived idea about the conclusion, right? That's against the nature of, let's say, research-oriented approach, right? But as you can see, when we dive into the details, when we break down the different components and elements of the issue, at the end of the day, we don't see any other option for now. In the 14th day, at the beginning of the 15th day of this war. Tomorrow, in 2 days, in 2 weeks, we don't know. But after 2 weeks, as you can see in all my programs, this discussion automatically, spontaneously, naturally, normally, without any really pre-organized orientation, right, finally leads to this conclusion, right? All my discussion make for this conclusion, result in the fact that most probably these crazy people, these completely insane Zionist people will trigger the starting of the World War III, atomic World War III. I hope not, but this is what we have for now as perspective and possibility. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please help me to share these videos with other people and leave the comments so that we can have a kind of brainstorming through the comments. Thank you.